Running back waivers. There were a couple injuries that were notable that are fab worthy. Clyde Edwards-Helaire could not walk off under his own power. Had a lower leg injury. He's going to be out for sure. So that is going to leave Le'Veon Bell as a potential waiver wire claim. He's rostered in more than 50% of leagues, but check and see if he is there. It is like what a top 3 offense in the league, if not the top offense. You're going to want to start Le'Veon against Atlanta, who's they're going to put up a ton of points. So you want Le'Veon there. And then other than Clyde Edwards-Helaire getting hurt, Cam Akers is out. So you have Darrell Henderson at Seattle, who's still rostered in almost 60% of leagues. So he's not really available. So I can't really recommend him there either. But then the one guy that is available is Zeke. Was hurt and did not play, and his calf strain has evidently gotten worse. It looks like he might be shut down again this week. Tony Pollard absolutely exploded in Zeke's absence to the tune of 28.5 half PPR fantasy points with a line of 12 rushes for 69 yards, 2 scores on the ground, 6 catches for 63 yards through the air. Has Philadelphia at home, which I do not like a whole lot. If Philadelphia is good anywhere, I think it's mostly up front. They are only 23rd against running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed. So, I mean, Kenyon Drake couldn't do much against them. So, I mean, granted, I think Tony Pollard is probably a better running back than him. But out of let's call them the replacements. Okay. Out of Le'Veon Bell, Tony Pollard, and Darrell Henderson, how would you order your waiver priority or fab priority if you're going for the ship? You got Pollard versus Philly, Bell versus Atlanta, and Henderson at Seattle. Who are you dropping the dough on if they're all there? It's you and one other guy, right? So you feel like that makes it pretty straightforward. Well, I mean, you got the 3rd place game, so it's you and 3 other people.
So, I mean, my first thought is looking at this in a vacuum. The answer is Tony Pollard, right? But the fact that Zeke can come back and was expected to play this week and was a late scratch is rough. Tony Pollard had a 40-yard touchdown run. So I know I'm somewhat hypocritical in saying you take out that one play because I called you on that a couple of weeks ago. But if you take out a 40-yard touchdown run, he had 11 carries for 29 yards and a touchdown. So I don't know if that
9 points plus his receiving work.
No, that's true. You're right. You're right to bring up the receiving work with 9 targets, 6 catches, 63 yards.
So it's still 15.
So in a vacuum,
20 if you're PPR.
In a vacuum, it's Pollard. I don't think you can start Henderson because I just don't want to. I don't trust that backfield. Malcolm Brown could do what he did week 1 and end up with the touchdown vultures.
He's probably the 2-minute guy.
Yeah, maybe. So I honestly, I think I'm going Lev Bell.
Just for the hope of a touchdown.
Hope of a touchdown. You have a dynamic offense. Atlanta's been pretty good against running backs. Just their defense overall since Raheem Morris has taken over has been much better. This is the first week that they gave up 30 points in the last 6 weeks. So I would go Lev Bell if he's available. If Lev Bell's not available, going with Pollard, only hoping that Zeke doesn't play, because at worst you're getting catches out of him.
I'm going to disagree with you for one reason, and that reason is Darrell Williams, who played 22 snaps for Kansas City in on 22% of plays in Week 15. Le'Veon Bell only played 31. So I think that it will be a split. Hopefully Lev Bell ends up getting the goal line work there to make him a little bit more viable. But I think that there will be a nice, hefty helping of Darrell Williams. But for that reason, I am out on Le'Veon Bell, who I think is kind of marginal talent-wise. I'm much more attracted to Tony Pollard and his 90% snap share in week 15 and what that would look like in a championship week, even against Philly. Rostered in only 35% of leagues. He's also more available to more players. Yeah. He's going to have 90% of snaps if Zeke sits again. Rico Dowdle only played in a relief role.
Who?
Uncle Rico Dowdle. So I'm going Tony, even with the crappy offense. I'll take the volume. I'll take the assured roll and the check down passes, especially if you're in PPR. I would go Tony.
And it's at home in a dome, so you're gonna have good weather in Dallas. And I failed to mention this at the top, but it's another one of those things. Check the weather, because if it's slick or snowing, I generally don't trust wide receivers, but I will trust running backs in snow or slick conditions, just because teams tend to run the ball a little bit more.
Yep. All right, now let's move on, shall we, to some other running backs we got here. Next up, we have Malcolm Brown. We already mentioned him a little bit. He's obviously much more widely available than Darrell Henderson. Malcolm Brown is only rostered in 24% of ESPN leagues. Is he viable at Seattle? If they get down, they're going to have to pass a lot, or do you think it's going to be sort of a stalemate game, two good defenses lining up against each other?
Man, I feel bad about even bringing Malcolm Brown up because of everybody that spent
all the fab after week 1 and week 2.
After week 1, where he had 18 carries and then 11 carries and hasn't had as many since. You can't trust him. I don't think you should pick him up. I don't even want you to look at him as an option on your bench to be like, oh, Seattle. I think you're better off just completely staying away from him, knowing he's there, knowing it's an option. If the reason I wouldn't do it is because I'd rather see your opponent pick him up and put him in and be like, he could score 0 points.
Yes, he could. It'd be great.
So
5 catches for 15 yards.
Yeah. That's the thing where, you don't have to play defense anymore. You can almost play offense and be like, go ahead and pick him up. And if he goes off, it sucks, but he probably won't.
What I would say though, too, is a little bit to be the opposite of that is just because you have a set team and your set roster and you don't want to play any of these guys does not mean that you should not be picking them up, because Correct. If you pick them up, it's playing keep away from your opponent. You don't want your opponent to be able to go pick up and play Tony Pollard. So you need to still be active on the waiver wire, especially if you have a little bit more fab than they do. Sprinkle in a couple more bucks than maybe they even have left on a couple guys if you're sitting there with a nice fat bankroll, if you came in as the number 1 or number 2 seed.
Yep.
All right, next up, we got somebody that actually, I like the matchup. Salvon Ahmed at Vegas, rostered in about 24% of leagues, 24% of leagues. Are you looking forward at all to Mr. Ahmed and what he might be able to do against Vegas? He did manage 23 carries for 122 yards and a score against New England. Vegas currently, over the last month, is giving up the most fantasy points per game to running backs at almost 33 fantasy points per game to the position. He could be the waiver wire pickup, honestly. If Gaskin doesn't play.
Well, that's the thing, is we don't know if Gaskin's going to play. He was thrown on the COVID list, on the 12th. So we're recording this on the 21st. So that was 9 days ago. He was not activated on Sunday. So Salvon Ahmed had a well above average game, even that you basically had two touchdowns vultured from him too, with Tua that were inside the 10. So theoretically, still had
20 plus fantasy points.
No, I know he had a great game. But if Gaskin gets activated, can you trust either of them? I don't know. your guess is as good as mine is. The thing is that Gaskin was great, for a couple weeks there in the middle of the season, and then he got hurt, and he hasn't played since week 13 where he had 21 carries for 90 yards. I feel like if Gaskin is active, that he's the guy in a great matchup. Gaskin's rostered in 76% of leagues, so I doubt that he's available. So I think you pick up Ahmed in hopes that Gaskin is not active, and then I think you can play him against a really leaky Raiders defense, who's one of the worst in the leagues. It's in Vegas, so you have a great indoor game. We've already highlighted what Vegas gives up on a points per game basis. Basically, they've given up 30 points each of the last, X amount of weeks, or on average it is over that. So it's a great matchup. I would pick him up if he's available, just so somebody else can't if Gaskin doesn't play.
I agree. I would start whoever the starting running back is for Miami. If that's Ahmed, great. If it's Gaskin, great. I would start anybody against Vegas. Ahmed was questionable. Ahmed was questionable going into week 15 with the shoulder injury. And so for whatever reason, if neither of them play, I would fire up DeAndre Washington. I would fire up anybody against Vegas. Next up, we have good old Ty Johnson of the New York Jets. Going up against Cleveland this week, rostered in less than 9% of leagues, managed 14.5 fantasy points in half PPR, only had 3 rushing attempts for 16 yards, did have 6 catches for almost 40 yards and a score. Do you like Ty Johnson? You got to think that if you're the type of team that is picking up and plugging Ty Johnson, that there's no way you made it this far. I mean, Frank Gore's back. Think so. Right?
No, I know. 100%. He should not be rostered if you're, again, this is one of those, hey, let's look at low hanging fruit. He's got the points. So should he be picked up? And the answer is no. And even the same thing with Frank Gore, right? I mean, he's only rostered in 21% of leagues. He had 23 carries for the ageless wonder, Frank Gore, 13 fantasy points. I would rather have Gore than I would Ty Johnson, but I would not start either of them against Cleveland, who has what I think is a good defense, even though they've kind of given it up the last couple of weeks in some sort of manner, although they destroyed the Giants Sunday night. Just somebody to be on your radar. I don't think you need to pick him up. I wouldn't pick up Frank Gore either. But just know that Frank Gore is probably going to have the majority of the touches, but Ty Johnson has potentially the higher upside of the two.
Then next up, we have a few depth guys. Darrynton Evans. Man, as a Derrick Henry manager, was he frustrating as the backup for Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans. Averaged or had almost 14 fantasy points with 8 rushes for 30 yards, 2 catches for almost another 30 and a touchdown. Finishes with 13.5 fantasy points. Man, what could have been another whopping day for Derrick Henry. Still had 20 plus fantasy points, but man, that would have been a nice little cherry on top in back-to-back weeks. But you got to think that Green Bay is going to be able to keep this game a lot closer than Detroit was able to, and so maybe you see more Derrick Henry and it's a little bit more higher scoring. But either way, do you think Darrynton Evans is worth adding? Only rostered in 1.5%? Nope.
Yeah, just a name to be aware of. Again, don't add him just because he got a big week. He's clearly the backup. He might even be the third stringer there because they were up so much that they just put him in. Yeah, he scored a touchdown, but do not add him. I would just also add that Green Bay, Tennessee has the highest over under the week, which is 56. They're expecting a ton of points. The Titans are going to, like Derrick Henry might go for 200 yards again against one of the bottom 5 rushing defenses in the NFL in Green Bay. So yeah, do not add him. You could, but there's literally no point. You'd have to bank on a Henry injury, and hopefully that doesn't happen.
How disappointed were you though in Mike Davis against the Packers? only finishing with 14 rushing attempts for a whopping 59 yards against Green Bay. Like, I was expecting so much more on the ground. I mean, granted, you know,
they
Titans are much better
they didn't
than
have the
Carolina.
ball. Yeah, they didn't have the ball, and they got behind. Like, it's not like a super surprise, I guess, but it's just a little bit
fumble
disappointing.
at the goal line was not pretty.
No, yeah, I agree. But yeah, it was obviously disappointing. But I mean, yeah, you're not starting Derrick Henry.
Somebody else you're not starting, well, that you're actually not starting, is Gus Edwards going up against the Giants, rostered in 26% of leagues. I think he's a safe drop to go after any of these other guys, the injury starters or Jalen Hurts or anybody really. Like, Gus Bus is nothing special here. Rostered in 26% of leagues. Am I right on that? Are we on the same boat?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the issue is, so half PPR, I mean, he has 7 or more points each of the last 4 weeks. So does he have a high floor? I don't know. I mean, over that period, he's averaging like 5 yards a carry, 6 yards a carry, maybe a smidge more than that. The issue is that the Giants defense is pretty good overall. So I would not be excited to start Gus. I understand if you're in a rough spot, he could get in the end zone, but he just doesn't have the usage to be useful.
No, he does not. Somebody that does have the usage to be useful is Lynn Bowden Jr., also going up against Vegas, rostered in 14.5% of leagues, especially in full PPR, not so much in half PPR. But excuse me, if you also have Devontae Parker and Jakeem Grant sitting out again, then I think that Bowden could potentially be viable. 13 catches in the last 2 games. Granted, this last week he only had 6 for 37, but still full PPR, especially against Vegas. That's going to be a viable play if you're absolutely desperate.
Yeah, I think so. And we brought him up last week. Just a note again on ESPN, he's eligible at running back and wide receiver. So, I mean, if you basically want to start a wide receiver at your running back position, Lynn Bowden is available. We mentioned him last week, 14.5% rostered. He's got 7 or more points in each of the last 3 games after doing nothing the entire season. The Vegas matchup is a great one. And so, I mean, who would have ever thought about Lynn Bowden Jr. getting started in a fantasy title game? But I mean, here we are. He is playable if you're in a really tough spot.
Yep.